Welcome back, heroes. Today we're diving into one of the most explosive builds in Ascension WoW, the Draconic Pyromancer. If you've ever wanted to wield the raw fury of dragons and burn your enemies to ash, this is the build for you. We'll cover talents, rotation, gear, and everything you need to dominate both PvE and PvP on the Rexxar server. Let's get started and light it up. Alright, heroes, let's talk about our talent points. Just like all of our other builds, anytime we get to a skill, which is going to be the square ones versus passives, which are the round ones, we will cover those skills. Let's start with Meteor. Meteor allows us to get a really big circle right here for AoE damage, throw it down on the ground, kaboom, it does damage. More importantly, what Meteor does is calls down a meteor in an 8-yard range, dealing 371 flame strike damage to 8 enemies and disorients them for 3 seconds, just meaning that they don't walk straight. Meteor melts affected enemies' weapons, disarming them for 6 seconds. This is great for PvP, as it means that they can't do as much damage to you. We also pick up Dragon Leap. This leaps into the air, making the next Slag Stone or Slag Mend instant while airborne and resetting its cooldown. Slag Stone causes you to crash onto an enemy, dealing fire damage and slowing them by 85% for 1 second. Slag Mend causes you to descend on an ally, healing them and nearby allies for 4 yards for 12 to 15. Not a huge heal, but it can definitely help. So what that does is just allows you to go into the air, use Slag Mend, and it would normally make us crash land, but oh well. Now, that being said, let's talk about some passives real quick. We got Scorching Sermon. This one is useless for this build, as it only allows us to get it to a different item, but it does dealing damage with Scorching Ray or Draconic Fang, which we use both of those, extend the duration of Ignite and Blaze on the target by 1 second up to their maximum durations. Blazing of the Firelands, or Blessing of the Firelands, sorry, increases your critical strike chance by 2%. Infernus, Slagstone, now deals 10% of its direct damage as periodic fire damage every 1 second for 6 seconds. Slag's Mend now heals for 5% of its direct heal as periodic every 1 second for 3 seconds. Periodic damage or healing cannot critically strike. We grabbed up Boil. Boil incapacitates an enemy for 40 seconds, 8 seconds versus players, and removes all magical effects. Any damage dealt will interrupt this effect. Before we show that skill, just to show why we pick it up, we also do this one. Targets affected by Boil now take 15% increased fire damage. So anytime we throw Boil onto a target, it will now take 15% more fire damage. Flamer increases spell haste by 6% as long as you have both points in it. Flame Step, this is a really neat skill. Flame Step allows us to dash forward. We'll leave a big flaming trail behind us, and then we will also get flame casting from it in most cases. We picked up Dark Gaze, increases the range of Flame Step by 10 yards. We picked up Molten Rapacity, reduces the cooldown of Flame Step by 20 seconds, and Dragon Leap by 10 seconds. We use both of these skills in most cases, so having it is phenomenal. Flame Casting, fire damage critical strikes now grant Flame Casting. Flame Casting increases your spell haste by 5% for 15 seconds, stacks 5 times. Additional applications do not refresh duration. Apocalypse. Dealing fire damage has a 40% chance to slow the target's movement speed by 10% for 6 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. We also grabbed Volcanic Shell. Shields an ally, absorbing 2,604 damage. While the shield holds, attackers take 303 fire damage each time they deal damage to the target. Lasts 10 seconds, has a 1.5 minute cooldown. You can actually throw this on anybody, but when you do, they just get this nice little shield. And if anybody does damage to them, they take damage, and it absorbs a bunch of damage for us. It's fantastic. Moving on, we also have Cataclysm. Launch into the air, dealing 10 fire damage and knocking back enemies within 6 yards. Upon landing, deal 10 fire damage and knock back enemies within 6 yards. Usable while stunned. That's pretty much the only time I ever use Cataclysm, is if I get stunned for some reason. I can go boop, and then when I land, kaboop, it does more fire damage again. We picked up Fiery Intent, reduces the cooldown of Cataclysm by 30 seconds, so now it's a 1 minute cooldown versus a minute and a half. We have Pyromancy, direct critical strikes, has a 20% chance to refresh a charge of overheat. Magma Guardian increases the effectiveness of your skin spells by 50%. Focused Fire allows 40% of your mana regeneration to continue while casting and increases maximum mana by 3%. We picked up Rekindle. I'll show that one here in just a minute because I don't want to waste this one. But it imbues an ally with fiery power, restoring 5% of their max mana every 1 second for 7 seconds. When we use it with Overheat, we restore an additional 3% maximum mana per tick. And actually, I can use this one. This one right here, it's a 1.5-minute cooldown. You just pop it, and while it's going, it will give us mana back if we're starting to run out. The way I have this build set up, though, it's really hard for us to run out of mana. We also picked up Cinderfield. This affects Meteor. This actually got moved way down here because Meteor got moved way up here. Meteor was here. Now it's up here. But Cinderfield now creates a field of cinders on the ground for 12 seconds, dealing 172 fire damage over 12 seconds. We got Purifying Flames, increases the duration of Rekindle by 3 seconds so that we can get more mana back. Slag Drenched. Slagstone increases all magical damage the target takes by 3% for 8 seconds, and Slag Mend increases all healing the target receives by 6 seconds for 10 seconds. We still went with Ignis Ultimatus. Channel for 1.5 seconds, gathering a surge of fiery power before unleashing it in a 50-yard line, dealing 1,205 fire damage to enemies while also healing allies for 1,092. Ignores absorption, deflection, and reflection. Cannot be resisted. Flame casting increases the spell's damage and healing by 15% per stack. So as long as we're getting maximum stacks, we get a ton of extra damage. This is our biggest, hardest hitting skill. We also have Ignis Fatalis as the capstone. Ignis Ultimatus is now guaranteed to critically strike, has 20% more critical damage, and channels 0.5 seconds faster. So instead of it being 2 seconds, it's now 1.5 seconds faster. Charge time rather, and it just gives it more critical damage, and it's always guaranteed to critically hit everything it does. So that's going to be the left-hand tree. Now we're going to move over to the right-hand tree. This is where it's going to get fun for the Draconic itself. We're going to pick up Draconic Form. That's this nice form that retail will know as the Dractheri, or Dractherin, I believe. But this is probably the coolest transformation, in my opinion, in the entire game, as we get this nice bright red lava-esque fire type look to it. It's really, really nice. I really wish this was just a playable race altogether. Next, we get Destroyer's Maw. Unleash a vicious Draconic Maw on an enemy, dealing 248 fire damage, generating 2 breath charges. Cannot be resisted. Dragon Maw is really, really fun. Oh, we didn't show off Ignis Ultimatus. My apologies. Let's do that real quick. Charge. Kaboom. Nice big hits. So then we're going to do Destroyer's Maw. Just get close, and it hits a bunch of people. Well, in our case, it'll hit 2 people, but it can hit multiple. We have Breath of Malygos. Transforms your Ignite into Breath of Malygos. Scorch an enemy target with your Burning Breath, causing 115 spellfire damage over 2 seconds, and reduces their healing received by 40%, last 4 seconds, plus 4 seconds per breath charged unleash. While active, your fire attacks against the target have a 5% increased critical strike chance. This should always be the very first breath attack that you use on enemies. So as you can see, it's now got the Breath of Malygos on there. Ooh, wrong button. Next, let's talk about some passives real quick before we get to our next breath. We have Draconic Lineage. Increases the damage of Breath of Malygos by 15%. Dragonfire increases the damage of Slagstone by 20% and causes it to generate 2% maximum mana. This is important so that we can keep mana up. Alexstrasza's Gift. Damage dealt by Draconic Fang now has a 20% chance to reset the cooldown of Slagstone and grant Slag Bending. Slag Bending. Your next Slagstone within 15 seconds is instant cast and costs no mana. This is also a really good one as it will allow us to get more Slagstones out. Draconic Tempest. Draconic Fame now deals 10% more damage and reduces the cooldown of Destroyer's Maw by 1 second. Slagstoner increases the critical strike chance of Slagstone by 10%. Deadly Talons increases the critical strike chance of Draconic Fang and Dragon's Wrath by 5%. Destroyer's Legacy. Destroyer's Maw now blasts up to 10 nearby enemies for 232 fire damage when used on targets affected by Breath of Malygos. So you want to use the Breath of Malygos, followed up quickly by Destroyer's Maw. Mad Aspect's Scepter. Destroyer's Maw now increases the damage of your next Breath of Neltharion against targets by 20% for 4 seconds. Draconic Hunger. Damage dealt now has a 5% chance to unleash a Draconic Fang if the target is within 15 yards. This is automatic. It can only occur once per second. It is not something that you actually have to do. Yes, it is a low chance, but bear in mind that that is any damage done has a 5% chance. So this can proc quite a bit. Fire Breather. Breaths now increase all fire damage you deal by 2% for 10 seconds, stacking 3 times. We picked up Overwhelming Flames. Breath of Neltharion and Slagstone now strike an additional nearby enemy and spread Breath of Malygos to up to 2 enemies within 8 yards. So basically what we're saying here is you want to go Breath of Malygos, Destroyer's Maw, and then immediately go into Breath of Neltharion. Breathwork. Increases the critical damage of breaths and Slagstone by 10% and causes breaths to grant replenishment. Replenishment restores 1% maximum mana every 5 seconds to allies within 20 yards for 15 seconds. This is beneficial not only to us, but to our allies who use mana, such as our healers, that we can use to help keep them up better. Voldraken Adept. Using Slagstone against an enemy affected by Breath of Malygos deals an additional 30% of its initial damage over 3 seconds. This is great because we want to try and keep up Breath of Malygos as much as we can. Draconic Invocation. Instantly generate 5 breath charges, 30-second cooldown. The Dragon Within. Increases the critical strike chance of Draconic Fang by 10%. Breath of Nazadormu. Enhance yourself with Nazadormu's magic, causing Destroyer's Maw to trigger twice, and allows Mad Aspect Scepter to stack twice. Lasts 5 seconds per breath charge unleashed. So now what we want to do is use Breath of Nazadormu as soon as we can. Then as soon as we get 5 more charges up, we want to hit Breath of Malygos. Destroyer's Maw, it now procs twice, so we get 4 stacks. And then we immediately want to use Breath of Neltharion, so that we get it to spread Breath of Malygos to all other enemies. Dragon's Blood. Increases critical damage of Draconic Fang and Dragon's Wrath by 10%. Fiery Outburst. Increases the damage of Destroyer's Maw by 15%. Inner Flame. Increases spell critical strike chance of party and raid members by 3%. We picked up Draconic Attunement, reduces the effectiveness loss of Breath of Neltharion per additional enemy by 15%. This just means that the more enemies we hit, normally they would lose a whole bunch of damage. This reduces that by 15%. Aspect of Magic. Breath of Malygos now deals 25% increased damage and ticks 20% faster, but burns 10% of your maximum mana. And then we did Death from Above. Root enemies in a 40-yard line for 3 seconds, then fly in the air and soar forward in a blaze of glory, dealing 586 fire damage every 0.5 seconds to enemies in a 15-yard line for 10 seconds. I'll show that one off here in just half a second for that. Let me talk about the passives real quick, and then we'll go over rotation. Draconic, level 10 passive, you now have breath charges, allowing you to cast powerful breath attacks. Transform Scorching Ray into Draconic Fang. Draconic Fang blasts an enemy, dealing 106 fire damage and generating 1 breath charge. Usable while moving. Overheat generates an additional breath charge. We have the Breath of Neltharion. Unleashes Draconic Flames, dealing 43 fire damage to an enemy and up to 4 additional enemies, each taking 25% less than the previous. Initial damage increases by 100% per breath charge consumed. Draconic, level 15 passive, increases your critical strike rating by 15% of your intellect, your spell damage by 20% of your intellect, and your hit chance by 3%. Draconic at level 20, Slagstone now generates a breath charge. In addition, Slagstone can now overheat to deal 30% increased damage. Draconic level 30 passive allows your Breath of Malygos to critically strike. Draconic level 40 passive, direct damage fire critical strikes now generate an additional breath charge. Can only occur once every 2 seconds. Draconic level 50 passive, casting Draconic Fang now grants Speed of the Dragon, increasing your movement speed by 5% for 10 seconds, stacks 4 times. Slag Stone consumes the stacks to deal 7% increased damage and slow your target's movement speed by 5% for 2 seconds. Damage increased by 7%, movement speed reduced by 5%, and duration increased by 2 seconds per stack consumed. So, just to show, because I won't be able to do it during the rotation, this is called Death from Above. You jump in the air, and you breathe a bunch of fire. We got stuck in a tree, so that was terrible, but that's that. Little wand guy. All right, so let's talk actual rotation here. So just to show you how I have this set up, I have Draconic Fang, which is our normal go-to. I have Draconic Leap, so that we can use Slagstone as my 2 primaries. I've got Breath of Nozdormu, because that's the buff, as my go-to when it's off cooldown. Then we have Malygos, because like I said, we need to use it first. Then we can use Destroyer's Maw. And then we would want to follow that up with Breath of Neltharion. So it should literally go in this order. Proc, get 5 stacks again. Proc, get 5 stacks again. This can actually help us get to 5 stacks. And then use this again. Rinse, repeat. I am using the macro for Meteor so that it will be wherever my cursor is. We have Overheat, just in case we want to use that for Draconic Fang to get more charges up. We do have Eruption, which allows us to do increased damage and healing for 15%, and critical strike chance by 10%, but it won't let us regenerate mana until it comes off. We do have our Ignis Ultimatus here, as well as Slagstone. I don't typically use Boil, as it's not that effective on most enemies, even though it would give us a 15% increase to damage on affected enemies. We do also have our Greater Phoenix Blessing here. We always want to make sure that that is procced on us, as this gives us more intellect by 31, which in turn jumps us up to 262 on intellect. And as you can see, we end up having an almost 20% crit chance before we even get into combat. Okay, so before we start a rotation, I moved Death from Above off so that we don't accidentally launch ourselves off the edge here. But what we're going to do is we're going to start with Meteor, follow that up with Dragon's Leap, and then use Slagstone to come crashing back down before we start our full rotation. This should give us plenty of initial damage going through. We get our first 5 stack, pop that, Flagstone, Slagstone again. And as you can see, I barely ever have to actually use Draconic Flame in order to get all of my rotation to come through. And we do plenty of damage. Jump up, Slagstone down. But as you can see, it's a very fast build. And as long as we are doing our best to keep all of our stuff proccing as best we can do a ton of damage and keep a ton of debuffs on our targets. Does every skill do a ton of damage? Absolutely not. But it does do enough damage. And for the most part, the beauty of it is we don't really need to keep using our Breath of Malygos unless we see it fall off of our initial target that we're on. In which case, then we can pop it again. But there we go. That's our rotation. When properly employed, we can get up to, with our measly amount of gear we have currently, we can get up into the 4K damage area quite easily on mobs. And that's the Draconic Pyromancer in all its fiery glory. Whether you're tearing through raids or scorching opponents in PvP, this build brings the heat. If you found this guide helpful, drop a like, subscribe to the guild, and ring the bell notification so you don't miss the next build breakdown. Until next time, keep your flames burning bright, heroes. Peace out.